Okay, uh, for today, we will talk about technology exploitation. And there is this very long uh, slide deck that I saw in the internet that I felt would be a good material for us to talk about technology exploitation. Okay, so this is from Inconet, uh, Inconet Eastern Partnership. Okay, this is a 2015 slide deck. And if you would notice, it's a very European flavor. Okay, so this is really talking about the case of Europe. But later on, when I do the commentary, I will skip out the very specific portions concerning Europe so that we can do away with it. We'll just go more with the theory, okay, about it. But before we dive into the idea of technology transfer and technology commercialization, I'd like to explain a little bit on the title technology exploitation. Admittedly, when you listen or when you read the word exploitation, it tends to have a negative meaning, right? The idea of exploitation is like extracting the good value from something or even from someone without compensating, okay, without compensation. So, and the feeling is that the movement is just one way. So I have this thing or this person, I extract as much value as I can from that thing or that person, and that's it. Okay. And that's the normal connotation that we have with exploitation. Now, if you think about it, okay, the term exploitation can be very apt when it comes to technology. And in this particular module, we're talking about exploitation in the sense of utilization, in the sense of adoption, in the sense of commercialization and technology transfer. In short, we're talking about how do we manipulate technology for our purposes, right? So if you think of technology as some human being, right? Um, in a way, this technology can't really talk back or fight back, okay? But if one looks at it objectively, um, it does have that one-way feel, right? I have technology in front of me. I take advantage of it, right? I leverage whatever technology has to offer. Okay, this particular technology has to offer. I utilize, I adopt whatever is presented to me or proposed to me. And in the end, I don't really care about sustaining that technology, at least not initially, right? So the term exploitation is a very well maybe controversial term for our purposes, but it serves its purpose to highlight that fact that technology is really being used, okay, and its value is really being extracted from it to the point of maximal use, right? So we are maximizing the value of the technology, and we're extracting that value as much as we can, right? So in a way, it seems apt now. Now, for today, we'll talk about technology transfer and commercialization, okay, specific uh, activities concerning exploitation, okay, and we'll go on with first technology transfer. So, what's the definition of technology transfer? These are various definitions, but let's take a look at what they really mean, or what are the key points here. Okay, technology transfer. Okay, UNCTAD refers to it as the flow of know-how, experience, and equipment amongst different stakeholders, such as governments, private sector entities, financial institutions, NGOs, and research institutions. Okay, so the thing here is that it's a flow. Number one, it's a flow. So there's movement, there's a source, there's a destination, and what is being flowed. Okay, know-how, experience, and even equipment, assets, something tangible and intangible. So there's that flow. Okay. amongst the different stakeholders. Okay, so far, okay, seems simple enough. Okay, WIPO gives this definition. It's the transfer of new technologies from universities and research institutions to parties capable of commercialization. So now in the case of WIPO, it's very specific. The source is from universities and research institutions to parties capable of commercializing it. Okay. So in the earlier definition, it didn't really say much. It's quite broad. Okay. The source and the destination can be anybody. In the case of WIPO, it's very specific. So which one's correct? Well, actually, in both cases, they're correct. Okay, they're not really wrong. Okay, and we can look at technology transfer as the process of transferring, okay, technology, skills, knowledge, methods of manufacturing, samples of manufacturing, okay, and even facilities. Okay, and added to that, along with the facilities, you can actually need to transfer of organizations. So whenever you talk about companies buying startups, well, that's one form of technology transfer, right? And that's how a lot of the high-tech companies tend to survive, right? So sometimes when they see that there is a budding technology that could be useful for them, they just simply buy the whole thing. Well, that's one form of technology transfer. Okay? Or in another way, you can just have a meeting with that company, have a sit-down meeting, chit-chat, some technical stuff. Okay? That's also technology transfer. So there's a movement. There's a movement from a source or destination, okay, specifically about technology. Now, what are the aims and ways, okay, or the aims and means? Okay, so the aim is you want to give value to what was developed by R&D, by your intellectual assets, okay? So earlier we were talking about technological acquisition. Okay, so or sorry, technology acquisition. So the idea there is how do we acquire the technology? Okay, and one way to acquire the technology is by developing it internally, right? Technology transfer now aims to, okay, I have the technology right now, I've built it. How do we give it value? How do we make it valuable for everyone? Okay, so that's one of the aims of technology transfer. By moving that technology around, you're hoping that there is going to be some value after the transfer has been committed or done. Okay. Now, another aim or another goal of technology transfer is to increase accessibility of technology developments to a wider range of users. Okay. So here the idea is you want to increase the utilization, you want to increase the adoption, the use. Okay. Another aim is the development and exploitation, okay, including commercial, into new products, services, and applications, and increase competitiveness. So this is like the towards the end of the chain of motivations. Okay, you want to do technology transfer because by benefiting the technology that you gained from another source, okay, and you put value into it, then hopefully it makes you more competitive. Now, what are the means for technology transfer? Here you have two. You have the academe industry, that's one way, and you have among the the industrial sectors, I mean across companies. So for example, technology can happen between, let's say, a school like UANP and a company. Okay? So all the development that's happening from UANP, okay, will then be transferred to a company. Or it can be among companies. Okay. In fact, okay, if you look at the model par excellence when it comes to technology transfer, Silicon Valley, you'll notice that there's actually school there, there's academe there, and you have a lot of companies operating in that geographic locality. Okay. The school I'm referring to is actually Stanford University. So in Silicon Valley, so when you go to that area of Palo Alto, Mountain View, Cupertino, if you've been there in that area, okay, there's only one really strong academic institution, and that's Stanford. It's located in Palo Alto, and along Palo Alto. So in Palo Alto, you have Stanford, And then around Stanford, you actually have the top companies. In Palo Alto, you have HP there. Um, you have other companies like I think Precom used to be there. Some networking firms. If you move one town away, if you go, let's say, to Mountain View, you have Google there. If you go to Cupertino, you have Apple there. So Silicon Valley is that stretch of land in northern California, right? So just south of San Francisco. So okay, these are there. Okay, but you see that okay, the ways and means for technology transfer in that area is quite robust because you have both ways existing in in Silicon Valley. Now, what's the usual mechanism? So how does it operate? Well, technology transfer from donor to receiver from source to target may occur directly or through public or private technology brokers or agencies. Okay, so here you can see the triangle here. So it can be direct from the donor to the receiver, or it can be from the donor to the broker then to the receiver. Okay. Now the transfer may be originated from a technology push. Okay, so it's from the donor to the receiver. So I've come up with a technology, then I move it to the receiver, technology push, or it can be a market pull. So it can be something from the receiver that tries to get something from the donor. Maybe there's some demand for certain things, or maybe this company would like to explore newer options for them to look into. So that's a market pull. Okay. Maybe for most of us, we're just really familiar with the technology push approach because we sort of romanticize the idea of schools, universities coming up with the great ideas and then giving it to industry for their use. No, we're hoping we can be at that level, but technology transfer can be the other way around. I mean, anything that university might have, okay, the industry can pull, do a market pull, right? So, for example, even the concept of externships, wherein you have faculty working in companies. So internship would be for the students, externship would be for the faculty, right? If you're doing externships, uh, that's one manifestation of a market pull. So you're trying to draw technology from this particular faculty, okay, so that it would really operate well for their own companies. Now, what usually happens in technology transfer? Well, things like preliminary evaluation of the originality. So definitely, okay, are you the only ones doing it? Or are you copying it from somebody else? Okay. And if you're copying it from somebody else, or if it's not original, are you the best? Okay. And then there's going to be some market and technical assessment, and here are decisions to be done. Okay. It says there are three possible decisions. Okay. Proceed with the tech transfer, or you can defer the decision of the tech transfer. Okay. If it shows promise, but it probably needs a little bit more work. So it could be that the technology is still very young, very green, hasn't really established itself. It's like the vaccine, right? I mean, before you start giving the vaccine out, maybe it's possible that a pharmaceutical company would have had an agreement, let's say, with a university working on some precursors to the vaccine. It can do it right away. It can buy off that university firm or that university group, or it can wait. Okay, let's have an agreement. We can work with you, but let's not do the transfer yet. Or the third option is not to proceed with the transfer at all. Maybe the technology is not fit for them. Okay, who knows? So one of three options. Okay, and in the first two options, of course, intellectual property protection is something that you want to consider. So who owns what? Who owns the technology? Will it be the university, the donor, or will it be the company or the receiver? Now, for the receiver, okay, so evaluation of the business opportunity, okay, and then you try to identify the suitable business strategy for your technology. Then eventually you'll come up with an intellectual property agreement with your donor. Okay, and for the broker, okay, so the broker would need to assess the value of things. Okay, so from the donor, it would access the technology. It would maybe try to do a little bit of acquisition, okay? Storage, similar, let it incubate, okay? But then you just store it. I mean, it's just there. Maybe it won't see the light of day. Maybe you can't find a receiver for that. Okay, that's possible. But once you've identified the receiver, then you retrieve it. Okay? So these are the steps for your technology broker if you do engage a technology broker. Um, well, international tech transfer encompasses the transfer of technologies and technology cooperation among countries. Um, so it can happen between a developed and developing countries or countries in economies in transition. Uh, Transition economies are the old term, let's say, for those in the Eastern European bloc or in the former communist regime that had to move to a capitalist market. So you call this the transition economies. Okay. Or the tech transfer can happen among developed countries. Okay. So to further their technology. Or it can even happen among developing countries or countries with countries that have transition economies. Okay, technology transfer results from actions taken by various stakeholders, including, okay, so these are examples of your stakeholders. Could be anyone, in short, right? Um, and you know, it can, and the influence of your stakeholders can also vary. Okay? It's possible that your buyer can exert stronger influence in the negotiations related to technology transfer. Okay? Or maybe the users, they really dictate the terms and conditions for that. So who are examples of your stakeholder groups or your producers? So this would be your inventors or those in the universities. Okay. Consumers would be private sector, government agency, intellectual property brokers. Okay. Product producers, consumers. Okay. Resource providers. Okay. So these are other stakeholder groups involved in your technology transfer. Um, you can probably look at this from the perspective. Okay, this is your flow, your timelines from the idea to the prototype to the product. Who are the people involved and what's the usual process that happens? Okay, this is similar to the talk that we had earlier concerning the knowledge brokering cycle. So there are some similarities there if you've noticed. Okay, there's always the idea, prototype, and then the final product, right? But you can see different players are involved at different stages. Now, when it comes to tech transfer, okay, when it comes to networks and partnerships, okay, um, it's very important that these things are stable, that they're actually operating really well. Okay, and the whenever you do tech transfer, okay, a lot of these things are involved or included as well. Okay, so what are other examples of networks or partnerships? So networks of information service providers, network of consultants, excuse me, even networks of financial firms. So especially if you start to put more funding in it, so it becomes important that they're also involved. And even among stakeholders, there could be existing partnerships already. So even that is also considered or is dependent on. Okay. Now, interactions between research and industry. Okay, so what are the new trends? Okay, earlier we talked about or we broached the topic of open innovation. So that's one approach. That's in the case of industry. Okay, companies are developing open innovation approaches. Okay, so they combine in-house and external resources. These are interactions, okay, or even the academic community. And this is typical in the academe, right? So you organize conferences, you organize symposiums, you know, you have other partnerships. So these are the things that normally happen. Now, in addition to these usual protocols for research, you try to seek additional sources for funding. Okay, so that's something that a lot of research institutions do as well. No? So they look for grants, they look for sponsors, okay? And based on that agreement, they can determine how the tech transfer would happen as well, right? So will the sponsor own the technology right away, or will it make it open for everybody else, but they have first dibs? So there are many manifestations on how that would happen. Now, tech transfer and commercialization do not evolve naturally and linearly from research and discovery to discovery of scientific solutions. Okay. In the early days, it was considered to be linear. Okay, if you can see in the diagram, okay, invention disclosure, additional R&D work. Now you embody it in a product or in a process, and then you market it. That was the old way of doing it, or so they thought it was linear. The challenge with the linear approach is that it puts a lot of strain on expenses at the start, and that's why a lot of R&D costs can be sunk costs. And that's why later on, people don't really want to do R&D anymore, or they don't want to be involved in R&D anymore, because there's no guarantee that they'll be able to recoup the losses, right? Eventually they would think that, I'm spending a lot for R&D, and then I'm not getting much out of it. Okay, that's possible, and that's why R&D hasn't been more prevalent back in the days. But now it's understood to be very highly non-linear. Okay, so and if you take a look, okay, in 1 and 3 you have both the research sector and the enterprise sector. Okay, that's a start. And then there's some sort of tech transfer system. But underneath all of that is some sort of a framework that governs how they operate. And in each case, there's a lot of feedback mechanism. So it's not linear anymore in the sense that there are gates that everyone would have to pass through. It can be very fluid, it can be free flowing, freewheeling, and and it can happen very conveniently as well. Now the challenge, perhaps, when you look at this type of process, is that it's hard to track of newer things sometimes. Okay, but if your tech transfer system is good, then okay, maybe it would help resolve that issue. But sometimes it's not. Okay, there are things that may operate behind the scenes, but it's not immediately captured by the system. Okay, and it happens. Okay, and understand that this is not just simply between two parties. This can happen with many parties involved, many stakeholders involved. Okay, and that could even complicate things further. For example, your enterprise sector at one time can be the research sector at another time. So there could be switching of roles. Okay, or somebody who takes care of the governance function would now become the researcher themselves, or they become the consumers of the technology themselves. Okay? So, uh, what are the usual channels for technology transfer? Well, you have your formal channels. So, patenting, licensing, and spin-off, that is commercialization. Training, education, hiring of students, researchers, collaborative research, consultancy, that's knowledge management. Or you can have informal channels, publications, conferences, even just talking to people in the bars. So this is why Silicon Valley is a very popular model, because it has both the formal and the informal channels. Okay? It's well entrenched. In fact, recently we had a discussion regarding business incubators, technology business incubators, and the goal right now is not to look for the next Silicon Valley. It's really to look for the next 30 Silicon Valleys, right? Um, Silicon Valley will perhaps remain until in the near future as the premier model for technology, right? But technology incubation, technology innovation, transfer, commercialization, everything in technology, right? But the question now is that uh, Silicon Valley will reach its saturation point if it hasn't already reached it. So we really want to find models for that. Okay? And the challenge is not to look for the next Silicon Valley. Back in the early 2000s, they were thinking it would have been India. Philippines, let's face it, we're still far off from that. So I don't think that would happen, but who knows? Maybe a few more elements, few more conditions would come into the picture. Okay, so things would start to get rolling, and then okay, maybe it would work. Okay, for the Philippines. Okay, now who are your providers? Your technology transfer channels. Okay, your public sector, private sector. So these are your product. Now in government, public channels, you have a lot of agencies. In the case of the Philippines, you have DOST, who takes care of technology in general. In private sector, well, could be a lot of things, but take note that private sector channels can be highly influenced by government policy. So there could be regulations, especially if straight state control is very heavy. Example, in the case of China, a lot of the top universities are state-run. So they are very much influenced by government policies. Okay, that's quite likely. Okay. But in other cases, no, in other situations wherein it's highly capitalist, okay, I mean, you let the private sector run on its own. They're not really involved or they're not influenced by government policies. Okay. Uh, Here, okay, let's take a look here. Okay, private sector channels need special emphasis as they are regarded as the more essential channels for technology transfer. Okay, companies have an interest in external exploitation of their technology. And the thing here is that if you recall what we mentioned at the start of our course, technology on its own is useless, right? And the reason why uh, private sector channels would be more interested in technology transfers is because precisely because of that. I mean, technology has to be useful. So they're looking for something useful, and therefore they'd be much interested in it. If you don't have private sector in the picture, then technology will well, cease to be technology in a sense, right? It won't be useful. It won't see the light of day. Okay, that's the critical point there. So it's important that private sector is involved specifically. Now, companies may perform intra-firm technology transfer, or they can perform inter-firm technology transfer. Intra-firm within the company, so it's possible that they have multiple divisions. One division maybe is working on, let's say, printers. The other division is working on servers. I mean, they could harmonize one another, right? And there could be tech transfers across these divisions, or it can be across companies, which is the typical tech transfer that we see mostly. Intra-firm technology transfer is not usual because it's also dependent on the size of the firm, right? If your company is small, then there's really no intra-firm tech transfer. Okay, not yet anyway. Okay, now looking at motivations and barriers. Okay, so the rate of technology transfer is influenced by by the motivations and the barriers. Um, so if the motivation is high, okay, and that motivation actually induces more rapid adoption, then of course there'll be more incentive to do technology transfer. Okay, but if there are a lot of barriers that sort of prevent or create friction to 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 actually get that technology, okay, then they actually slow down the rate of technology transfer. Okay, and then we talk about values. Uh, Um, we talk about technology values, uh, and well, what are the usual benefits, so to speak, as regarding technology transfer? Um, Let me answer this. Okay, and there are many benefits to the technology transfer. Solving real world problems, that's number one, right? Uh, Local economy development, okay, jobs creation. So there could be many. I mean, this is not an exhaustive list, but I'm sure you can find many reasons why you'd want to be involved in technology transfer. Okay, firms are motivated to acquire technologies due to the potential of could be reducing costs or increasing the technical capabilities that cannot be achieved on their own. Okay, even from the perspective of status, we're interested to undergo technology transfer because it makes us look cool. It makes us look exciting, right? Okay, and then greater access to export markets, access to new distribution networks, so on and so forth. Okay. Okay. Now, universities are also motivated to engage in tech transfer. I mean, for a lot of these reasons. Okay. Really, the idea is to be able to strengthen their own community, these universities. Uh, and then at the same time, it gives their students the opportunity for a next step, right? So if there is good technology transfer, a lot of these students can easily integrate themselves in the industry through this path, through this channel. Okay. And also other things like you can learn a lot from the industry as well. So universities are really involved in universities. Okay. Oh, sorry, university involved in technology transfer. And well, the last item, the last bullet point is very intriguing, right? Uh, it is motivating to have extra income. So yeah, hey, there could be additional money here. That's quite possible. But it's not always the case. Okay, it's people tend to forget that sometimes when you have good technology, it's not always the case that you have something that's fantastic that can be capitalized. Okay, not everyone would have that opportunity. Okay, and okay, so what are the possible barriers? Well, maybe the donor is willing, but the receiver isn't prepared. So you can have a lack of human capital, lack of absorptive capacity. Okay, or it can be that there are no connections, no partnerships, no one to transfer to. You don't know who to talk to. Okay, so lack of connectedness, or maybe initially you don't really trust the donor. Okay, or you don't even trust the receiver. Maybe the receiver will not maximize it for use. Okay, or will not really draw benefit from the technology. Okay, lack of prior experience. So this is more process related. I mean, technology transfer can slow down if you're really burdened by the legal aspects, right? So, or by the policy aspects, you have to learn what are the rules, the regulations. And similarly, lack of integrated policy and support. So that's the item on technology transfer. So I will skip through this. So this is really more Europe. We'll go to commercialization. Okay. Now, commercialization is a very specific case of technology transfer. So here's the definition. It occurs when the party transferring technology receives money in exchange for giving up some or all the rights to the technology. It involves a sale. So when you commercialize a technology, it involves a transaction, a sale, okay? And there is that element of transfer of ownership, okay? In exchange for that ownership, there is something that is given in return. So there's some sort of compensation for that. And typically that's monetary in nature. So what can be commercialized? So, okay, intellectual property as a whole, okay, any science, technology, engineering insight, okay. But the thing here is that ideas and concepts alone cannot be commercialized, okay. It is necessary that they become inventions, okay, that they can be reduced to practice. Now, if there's no demand, the technology will not be commercialized. Okay, so naturally, if there's no use, if there's no demand, if it's not embodied into some product or service, then there's nothing really to commercialize, right? So here's examples of the what happens in the commercialization process. Okay, so in a way, the flow of things. Okay. Uh, so now what? Now you know that technology can be commercialized. Well, now what? Okay, three main vehicles. Spin-off, well, spin-off creation. That's one way to commercialize technology. Internal development and use, which is the most common one, and licensing. Okay. So internal development and use. Okay, you make use of your own technology. Okay. And it's for your own benefit. So sometimes you use the technology to build the technology further, or to build other technologies further. Okay, that's possible. Spin off, instead of using that technology for yourself, you give it away to somebody else in exchange for some money. So you spin it off. Once you spin it off, you have no more stake in it, right? Because you've been fully paid for that. Or it can be licensing. You allow external parties to make use of the technology in exchange for a fee. So you teach them how to use this. You allow them to use the technology, give them some access perhaps. In exchange, they pay you for per use. So that's licensing. You still own the technology, but you only allow certain people to use it. Okay, so that's one way. Uh, Now, the greatest risk is associated with spin off. Okay, because the moment you spin it off, that's it. Um, you lose ownership, you lose control, and you're not even sure whether you're being paid a justified amount. Okay, so that's one thing that you want to look into. Okay, so there are some criterias. Uh, Again, I don't think this is comprehensive. This is not exhaustive. And an important issue to consider is really intellectual property. I will talk about that in protection or protecting technology. We'll go deeply into the aspects of IP, but for now, you can just read this on your own. And then some relevant thoughts. Well, commercialization is about really selling the product, selling the technology away. And well, money that you get from commercialization can be fed back into your research, but it's not the sole reason for tech transfer. Maybe to the economist or to a capitalist that might be the sole reason, but research has its own value. Okay, it could transcend beyond the technology, or sorry, it can transcend beyond the commercial value. Okay, now exposure is necessary. Of course, people have to know that there's a technology for sale. Okay, uh, and it's really up to the researchers, the donors, so to speak, to really go out and look for receivers. And good deals are win-win, okay? But contrary to some popular culture, greed is not always good. Getting rich is a long shot, as I mentioned earlier. No one can be very successful in coming up with a fantastic blockbuster technology and be billionaires out of it. But it could be a good motive. It can be a good motivation. But remember, when it comes to technology commercialization, not everyone gets rich right away. Sometimes you just pay off the costs that you incurred. And that was it, right? So you just recovered the cost. And that's fair, no problem. In the end, as a researcher, your objective is to elevate human knowledge, so to speak, through the development of the technology. Now, I'm going to stop here for now. No? So there are other aspects about tech transfer and commercialization. Um, with that, are there any questions regarding tech transfer, tech commercialization? Feel free to unmute and share your thoughts as well if you have any.
Hi, sir.
Yeah, hi Dale.
Dale here. Yeah, with regards to technology transfer, I'm just wondering how the technology transfer happens with an open source technology. So,
Okay,
for example,
yeah,
a
yeah,
private
go ahead.
company use an
Yeah.
open source technology like OpenStack, like that.
Okay. Okay. In the case of open source technology, the idea is that it is it is communal, right? There's a community, right? And although the perspective of technology is donor receiver, but if you look from the perspective of the what you call it perspective of the open source community, they're actually donors and receivers at the same time. Okay, in fact, there could be brokers in between, right? So they could be donors, they could be
Yeah.
receivers, they could even be brokers. So that's how tech transfer really happens in an open source situation, right? It's a community. It's a community of developers who want to build onto it. So it happens in that manner, okay? And you see academe play a role in it. So you have a lot of researchers from industries, the tawag dito, that they work on, diba? So but you also have private sector people who actually work on it. So gano. I mean that's one way of doing it.
Okay, sir.
Sige.
Thank you.
Did I answer your question? But yeah, but because it's a community, then technology happens within that community.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you for that, Leo. Any other questions? Uh, okay, sige. Well, I mean, we can cut it short. Let me